Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have some important news out of the Commonwealth of Virginia where there has been some ratings changes for the upcoming 2025 governor's race in the state of Virginia. Wasting no time in getting to it, there's been some predictions changes from the Cook Political Report, who previously had Virginia listed as a toss-up. They now have it listed as lean Democrat, which would be a Democratic flip. Inside Elections has had it as tilt Democrat for a while now, and they still do. And Sabato's Crystal Ball also had it as a battleground, now also have it as a lean Democratic flip. So for today's video, I want to talk about the Virginia governor's race for 2025, what it's looking like right now, and what I think the fundamental question for this governor's race is how much does the governor's race represent or resemble the 2017 governor's race in the state of Virginia? So these predictions have been made, and now the governor's race between Democrat Abigail Spanberger and Republican Winsome Earle-Sears is now starting to take shape, as we're only about 5 months or so away from the general election that'll be taking place in November. And the question is, okay, the Democrats are now favored according to the top 3 predictions, political forecasters, Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, Sabato Crystal Ball. Why do they make this ranking? Why is Virginia now in the lean Democratic category? Well, the early polling that's been done so far, and I'll be honest, there hasn't been a lot of polling, but it's been pretty consistent that the Democrat Abigail Spanberger has led in every single poll, or at best, it's been a tie between Spanberger and the Republican Earle-Sears. So, and from the polls that are not affiliated with a party, where it has an R next to it means Republican affiliated, or a D, or whatever, Democrat affiliated. The ones that don't, Mason-Dixon, Spanberger's leading by 3, Emerson, Spanberger by 1, Virginia Commonwealth by 10, and Roanoke College by, 15? Now, again, it is worth noting some of these polls were taken back in December and January, and now they're inside the margin of error. But for what I'm really interested in is I want to look at a race that was one of the first races I remember covering, and this was the 2017 Virginia governor's race. And when you start to look at it, you're starting to see some similarities between the 2025 race and the 2017 one. So let's remember right now, I'm recording this May 1st, 2025. Let's go back to the 2017 race. Ralph Northam, the Democrat, ended up defeating Ed Gillespie, the Republican, by approximately 9 points in the 2017 Virginia governor's race, in what was expected to be a very close election. And both of these candidates were very good. I believe Ralph Northam was the lieutenant governor of Virginia at the time, and Ed Gillespie was just coming off running a very close race in the 2014 Virginia Senate race against Mark Warner, where he almost pulled off an upset against the now long-tenured Democratic senator from the state of Virginia. So both of these candidates were very formidable in terms of the parties putting up good candidates, but it ended up being a 9-point Democratic win. And when you look at the polling, it ended up being Northam plus 3.3 by Election Day. But when you go back in time and look at where things started and where they are around this time, it starts to get kind of interesting. So early on in 2015, this is when President Obama was still in office, and there was starting to be a little bit of a anti-Obama sentiment, not as much as going into 2014, but following 2014, where the Republicans were upset with President Obama and the Democrats in charge in Washington and wanted some change. So in the early polls that were taken in this race, Ed Gillespie actually led in pretty much every single poll in the same way Abigail Spanberger now leads. The only difference is that started to change around December. And if you want to get really technical here, after the election of Donald Trump as president, where he got elected in November and took office in January, the polling did start to shift a little bit. 2 polls in December showed the Democrat Northam leading. Now some polls in early January, the last poll before Trump took office, Gillespie in the Mason-Dixon poll held a 3-point lead over Northam. Now February 10th through 15th from Quinnipiac, this is going to be about a few weeks after Trump has taken office, Northam's now leading by 6. But Gillespie is still standing strong. 2 polls from March shows Gillespie narrowly ahead by a few percent, and then a poll in April from Quinnipiac shows Northam leading by 11 with a lot of undecided vote, 19%. Now we're starting to get into the time frame that we're in right now. The most recent poll from the same time period that we are would be May 9th through May 14th. And in this poll, Northam has 49%, Gillespie is 38%. One last Republican poll from Public Opinion Strategies had Gillespie up by 1, and then from then on, you have to go a long time before we see another poll where Gillespie was leading over Northam. From June of 2017 to about the middle of October, there was not one poll that had Gillespie leading. And you may be wondering, okay, why? Well, there's two things. One, Virginia at its core is a state that does typically lean to the Democratic side. When you look at the past elections for president, Virginia has been more so on the lean to likely Democratic side. It was likely Democrat in 2024, likely Democrat in 2020. 2016, it was likely Democrat. 2012, it was lean Democrat for Obama. 2008, it was likely Democrat for Obama. And 2004 was the last time I voted Republican for Bush at 8.2% at the presidential level. So the state itself had been trending to the Democratic side for some time now, but 2021 showed Virginia is still a competitive state that can elect a Republican governor in the right environment. However, we did start to see around this time things start to shift with President Trump's approval numbers. So again, remember when Trump took office, it was around January 28th, 2017. Trump came into office already underwater. He was around 43.8% approved to 49.6% disapprove. But now let's go to that poll that came out in May. Trump's approval ratings would have been around 43.6 to 51.3. That would be, if you're doing the math, around 8 points or so, Trump would be underwater. And then as time went on throughout the governor's race, as I mentioned, October was the last time Gillespie led in a poll for the last 4 months before that. Trump was then underwater at that point, according to the polls, by about 15 points. Now, it is worth noting Trump's approvals did start to get a little bit better in the later part of 2017, but by the time the election took place in Virginia, Trump's approval ratings were still way underwater at 39% and favorable, and then unfavorable would be around 56.5%. So Trump was really unpopular in 2017 at this time. And the state of Virginia, which again, looking at the 2016 presidential election, just voted 49.8% for Hillary Clinton and only 44.4% for Donald Trump. A lot of people in Virginia were fed up with President Trump and the Trump administration, and in turn took that out on Ed Gillespie, who, it is worth noting, even though he did work for George W. Bush in the White House from 2007 to 2009, and he worked on Mitt Romney's campaign in 2012, he was endorsed by President Trump, and a lot of independents and Democratic voters in Virginia took their anger on President Trump out on Ed Gillespie by voting for Ralph Northam. The question was going to be for this race, though, as it got closer from about June to October, it looked like it was going to be a Democratic win. But then a few polls come out showing it's still a close race. One poll was Monmouth University, Hampton University, and the polling company. But it started to become very clear Northam had the lead going into Election Day. The question was going to be, what would the margins have been? Because even though Northam was leading by pretty consistent measures in the polls, so he was only trailing in 3 or about 6 polls over the course of about 6 months or so, it was pretty clear Northam was going to win. The question was going to be by how much. The final polling averages ended up being Northam at 3.3% over Gillespie 44.4% on Real Clear Politics. And then the actual election results for Gillespie wasn't that far off when you look at the numbers. Again, the final polling average had Gillespie at 44.4%. The actual votes for him was 45%. So the polls on the Republican side were only off by about half a percentage point. The problem for the Republicans was a lot of undecided vote that was still out there. And again, when you look at it, Northam had 47.7% with 7.9% undecided, about 8 points or so. If you took every single vote of that 8 points plus that 47%, you would have gotten around 55% or so, about 55.7% would have been Northam's vote total. What Northam actually ended up getting? About 53.9%. So only about 1% or so, a little over 1% of that undecided vote ended up all breaking for Ralph Northam. And when that happens, the only way to look at it really is that is an election environment trend breaking all towards one party, in a large part due to a repudiation of either the incumbent administration in the White House or the incumbent administration in the governor's office. And it wasn't the latter, because the Democratic governor, Terry McAuliffe of Virginia at the time, was in charge, and the Democrat Ralph Northam won this election by an even larger margin. Virginia has a history of electing the off-party governor after the president is in charge, meaning Trump just won, Trump's a Republican, this election should be a Democrat winning. In 2017, that was the case, where Northam, the Democrat, won against the Republican as Trump was president. Glenn Youngkin in 2021 won a very close election as a Republican as governor. Joe Biden, the Democratic president, was in charge. Not very popular at the time, and that's what happened. So now for 2025, what this all means is the early showings so far in the polls, and again, I have to obviously caution the fact that we are in, May 1st of 2025, still a long way to go until November, but everything that's looking like so far, the early polling shows this race is kind of on par with what 2017 started out as. So as for 2025, you're really starting to get the makings that Virginia is probably going to go to the Democrats without question. The question is going to be, by what? What are the rankings going to be when it does end up going for the Democrats? And when you look at the map from 2017 to 2021, you look at some of the areas where Ralph Northam, the Democrat, ended up doing very well. Virginia Beach. This is a very suburban area. This is where the Republicans, if they're winning in Virginia, they're going to be winning Virginia Beach. Northam won here about 52% to 47%, approximately a 5-point win. In 2021, when Youngkin won, he won this area by 8 points. Neighboring Chesapeake, not as large as Virginia Beach, still a very competitive suburban area. Youngkin won here by about 6 points. Looking at 2017, Northam won here by about 8 points. Again, the margins in these areas are very crucial, and they're very indicative of how the state is going to be voting. If it's election night in 2025 and you're seeing Virginia Beach go for the Democrat or going for Abigail Spanberger over Winsome Sears, that's a very key sign that Virginia is voting more to the left than the Republicans need, and the Democrats more likely than not going to win pretty early on in the night. But as we always talk about Virginia, we always mention Virginia Beach, we always mention around Richmond and Henrico County, but the three northern D.C. suburbs of Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William are always key. These are the largest population areas in the state in terms of a cluster of votes. And when you look at how they voted, Loudoun County voted for Northam over Gillespie by about 20 points. Youngkin versus McAuliffe, it was only an 11-point win for the Democrat. That margin was a huge difference here. Doing the math just quickly in my head is about 18,000 votes separating McAuliffe and Youngkin, right? About 18,000 votes. Let's look at 2017. This is going to be about 23,000 votes. Again, just that 5,000 vote difference makes a big difference in a very close race. Prince William, it was 60.8 to 38.2. If you want to get technical, you could say that's going to be about 22, 23 points or so. About 23-point margin in Prince William. In 2021, it was only about a 15-point margin. Again, that difference is huge in a very close race. Margin of victory here about 23,000 votes in Prince William in 2021. 2017, the margin of victory, this is going to be about 27,000 votes. Again, that 4,000 or 5,000 vote difference in a key Democratic area is very important. Lastly, Fairfax County, about 36 points or so, 37% margin of victory, 37. Now we look at 2021, about a 30-point margin. Again, that 7% difference is very, very key. So in 2017, we saw very big turnout numbers in the D.C. suburbs. In 2021, Glenn Youngkin was able to make up those margins. As for 2025, right now, everything suggests, based on the election environment and how President Trump is currently doing, which, as the last time I checked, Trump is polling around 45.1% now. Don't forget, we're at the end of May, or the beginning of May. He's at 45%. If you want to go back to 2017 or so at this point in time, at the beginning of May, Trump was polling around 43.6%. So Trump's doing about 2% higher than he was at this current time back in 2017. But Trump's numbers are also going down at a pretty fast rate over the last few weeks. So what if come November, what if Trump's approval rating is around 40% again? Trump's was even lower at the time, but what if Trump's numbers are down into 40%, 39%? That would be very hard times for Winsome Sears and the Republicans of Virginia to try and make up, and would likely suggest Abigail Spanberger is definitely favored in this race. As for what I think the rating is personally in the state of Virginia at this time, I would bet, I know it's a lean Democrat right now by all the rankings, I would put Virginia as likely Democrat. Likely Democrat means it'll be more than 5 points, but it'll be under 15 points. And again, I think 2017 is going to end up looking like a very spitting image of what 2025 is going to end up being for the governor's race in Virginia. I expect the polling to be relatively tight leading into Election Day, with Spanberger probably having a 4 to 5 point lead in the polls. But then come Election Day, there's going to be a lot of undecideds end up breaking, where about an 8 to 8.5 point win for Spanberger over Winsome Sears is going to resemble pretty closely what Northam versus Gillespie ended up being. That's my up-to-date prediction on Virginia. But I'm interested to hear what you think about this. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts about this news, about this video, and what I laid out in Virginia. What do you think about what I'm saying on this? Also, make sure to hit like and subscribe as I post at least 2 new videos every single day. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.